Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Control Alt Deploy. I'm Alex, and with my co-host Kuba here, and we have a very special guest, Janna Loeffler. She's a senior technology leader with over 20 years experience leading quality engineering, testing, and platform reliability across very complex digital ecosystems. Janna, welcome. Good to have you on.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Very nice. You are a so you said you're a quality engineer. I come from many years of quality assurance, software testing. How does it differ?
Yeah, so I know a lot of testers get put into that kind of bucket or given the role or title of quality assurance, and words matter. So when you say quality assurance, you have this preconceived notion that you can assure quality. And the fact of the matter is, it's hard to assure quality because, you don't have control over the developers, the scope, the time, the budget, all of that. So what I like to say is I'm a quality engineer. And I like to define quality engineering as kind of where the product development lifecycle and the software development lifecycle meet, kind of the glue between there. So how do we engineer quality from the entire life cycle of the product? You know, you hear a lot of shift left, but it's not just shift left, it's also shift right. It's got to be throughout the system. And so how do you engineer that into the system?
LLM applications and AI agents behave in ways that software testing was never designed for. These non-deterministic systems depend on tools, retrieval data, orchestration layers, and they fail in modes that traditional quality assurance simply cannot catch. That's why we built TestSavant AI, the AI assurance and reliability platform that helps teams putting generative and agentic AI into production close that gap. TestSavant runs continuous evaluation as well as adversarial testing against your live workflows, deploys runtime guardrails at exact points where the AI system failed in practice, and produces assurance evidence that your quality, engineering, security, and compliance teams need in order to ship with measurable confidence. If you are deploying AI, then you need an AI assurance stack. So head to testsavant.ai for more details and to book a demo. Now back to the show. Okay. Okay, it makes sense. And so now we kind of like to talk about AI and how AI is affecting everybody's lives. How has it affected quality engineering?
It's a huge impact to quality engineering, and it's really interesting because a lot of people are getting into that same AI is the silver bullet that's gonna save us all. And unfortunately, it's just not quite there yet, and people aren't using it in necessarily the most efficient and effective way. I'm all about efficient and effective. I'm lazy. I want to have time to do the things that I enjoy doing, so I want to do my testing efficient and effectively. And so what you'll see is a lot of people focusing on like test case creation and AI bots. And you have a lot of people panicking, oh, it's going to replace my job because it can write all of these test cases and test scripts. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have that human insight into, am I creating the right test cases? I can use a bot to generate hundreds of thousands of test cases. Now my build pipeline is taking 4 hours to run because I have all of these edge cases and everything. And it's actually slowing down development. So how do you use, it's now gone from, we need to use AI and AI is here. It's a real thing, but how do we use it to kind of flex our skills and 10x the amount of work that we can do as testers? A lot of people, like I said, start with that test case generation. And I like to advise people that that's not necessarily the best place to start. And the reason why I say that is as software testers or quality engineers, we understand quality pretty well. We understand risk pretty well. We understand context pretty well. And so it doesn't take us that much effort or that long to write down all of our test ideas and develop those test cases, have that test strategy. What takes us forever is, some of that regression testing, checking all the different scenarios. A lot of times we can't get to things that we want to, like accessibility testing or even some basic security testing. So why don't we have bots that can do that, agents that can do that for us. It's pretty easy to train a accessibility agent because all the standards and guidelines are already out there. Same thing with security. You can train an agent pretty easy on the OS top 10. So if I have a bot doing that, now I have additional coverage. I have all this additional testing that can happen while I'm doing my normal testing. So that's where it's really going to start impacting the quality in the testing space, is by allowing us to focus more on what we do well, which is quality and testing and that engineering.
Yeah, so you're saying automate the mundane, basically, right?
Yeah, automate the mundane, or automate the things that you just don't have time to do, but really wish you could have gotten to.
So you said, okay, well, you can use tools for regression, but now we have, problems with regression, with finding regression, because it's going to be different every time like you test it. And so how do you deal with that aspect of testing when regression now becomes more difficult?
Yeah, it's really becoming more non-deterministic. And the interesting thing about that is now it's no longer kind of a pass-fail sort of clean output. It's more, and this is where testers come in even more, because it's going to be more context driven. It's going to be more on accuracy and relevance. It may not be that exact string output the exact same time, but am I portraying the same message? So that's where your typical test automation is going to fail, because your typical test automation is very deterministic. I do these things, I expect this exact output. Well, now I no longer have that exact output. And that's where AI is going to help out a lot too, because you can train it around the context to say, yeah, well, maybe I didn't get that exact output, but the intention and the context is still there. That's why I say testers are still needed, because we're going to get it wrong. We still have to review what's coming out of this and how we're using it, because I like to refer to AI as kind of a highly skilled intern. It can do a lot. You can give them a lot of great tasks, but at the end of the day, you kind of want to double check the work.
Yeah, one of the concepts that we're kind of seeing is that after the whole AI is going to give you a different answer each time, has to be part of the requirement, right? Somebody has to decide what is the right amount of variability that's allowed. But on the other hand, if you test it and there's variability, and like QA becomes, the scapegoat, or QA is blamed that it didn't meet, it's not deterministic. So there's like this deterministic expectation on QA to say, okay, it's right, but there still has to be some requirement that says there should be some fuzz factor for good enough. And so, like, how do you kind of navigate that, where you might get blamed for a poor requirement, really?
Yeah. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when I say there's a difference between quality assurance and quality engineering. Because absolutely, if you're trying to assure quality and verify that it's going to be absolutely correct every single time, you're going to fail. You're setting yourself up for failure. But let's look at quality engineering, where you're working with that product manager to help them understand that this is a non-deterministic output. So really, what are your expectations? What is the context around this? What is the intention behind this? And you're working with your developers of and you guys are writing this code. You're kind of the experts behind the model sometimes, and how this does. How do I enable you to do the testing you feel needs to be done on this model, or, on this scenario? Because then it becomes a kind of a group responsibility. And I like to say, everybody says a lot of times that, yeah, everybody should be responsible for quality. And that's extremely true on a lot of AI products, things like that. What I like to say is, yes, everybody should be responsible for quality, but you need somebody accountable for that quality. And that's where as a subject matter expertise, expert in, you have to, as a quality engineer, you have to have that expertise to work with them to say, have you thought about this? How have we engineered quality into this? So at the end of the day, whether it's the exact output or there's some fuzz to it, we're all under the same understanding of what is the intention and is this producing the output that is desirable.
Yeah,
And
testers
that's
don't
where
really have. No, I'm sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I was going to say, because you can no longer say, it's the correct output. No, is
Yeah.
it the desired output?
Yeah, yeah, and with agentic systems, it's even more so, right? Kind of like the intent and whether that intent was achieved, and was there any drift along the way out of it? Because from QA perspective, like you're used to and expecting a pretty detailed spec, right? Detailed requirement document, and from that you start to formulate your testing. You already kind of are able to understand what pass and fail is, and then automation requires the most stability in the product, right? The most, like I think you said, the most determinism already built in because it has to run consistently all the time. Any kind of small minute change, and it fails. Right? Automation fails, but now it's probabilistic, and you kind of have to include automation earlier on, simply because the scope of variability, like you're now no longer really classifying pass fail. You're now talking about how often does something happen, how often does it not do something. So what's the expected percentage of times that it does something that is not based on the intended functionality. And I think automation has to be brought in a little bit earlier now. But in your experience, how do you automate? What areas do you automate when it comes to AI testing and
Yeah.
quality?
So variance testing is a lot of it, doing a lot of work around the intention routers, things like that, accuracy. There's a lot of things that you can go into as far as that is concerned. But I kind of want to hit on the fact of automating earlier. And that's where I also see a big shift in testing and quality. I'm actually even thinking about changing my kind of title role, once again, words matter, to quality enablement over quality engineering or quality assurance. And because it's going to very much become how do I enable people to determine what quality is and how to test for that quality. So we're going to be looking at a lot more of, once again, how do I enable product developers to understand that this output is non-deterministic and figure out what is the intent, not just give me a requirement, but what is the actual intent? What is the outcome you're looking for? There's going to be a lot more focus on outcome over output.
Uh-huh.
Which I think is going to actually, I think it's all a very positive thing. Um, Testing is going to have to scale. There's going to be a variety of expertise, technical expertise, and things like that. So how do we build, AI agents to enable developers to do their own testing? Because they're going to be some of the experts, technical experts around this. We can build out agents using our test based on our testing knowledge, train it up on I'm a subject matter expert. So these are the things that I would think of, and then put that in the hands of the developer to say, look, okay, I know you're testing. Let's just take a basic website, have a bot that says, okay, I know you're testing a website. Here are just the general things that I think you're going to need to test to begin with. And then that allows them to, utilize that bot, run their code against that bot and create, handle a lot of that functional testing, things like that.
Uh-huh.
Where now as a tester, okay, that's great. I know it's a website. I need to do the same thing for a mobile application. So what would a bot look like for that? So it's really kind of taking some of those personas and creating, I'm a big fan of like single purpose apps or single purpose agents, I should say, not apps, agents.
Uh-huh.
And then using an army of agents, having your developers kind of pick and choose which agents are most applicable based on their technical knowledge. And then
Uh-huh.
have your testers who are really going to understand that context to do more of the, not only the exploratory testing and validating, not even verifying, because non-deterministic is harder to verify than it is to validate that you're having the outcomes that you're expecting and that you're training up these bots that to be or training up these agents to to the best of your ability. So it's going to be, I mean, we can't expect developers to write their own testing agents or train their own testing agents. That is just a completely different mind frame and data set than what a software tester or quality engineer has. So that's where I think the industry is really going to start seeing that shift, is from doing that hands-on testing, writing those test automation scripts, to how do I create these agents? How do I create different components that enable product owners and developers to do that testing that will help ensure, not necessarily always ensure, but help increase the quality of the outcome.
What are the expectations that you're seeing put on testers in terms of their knowledge of ML, of it seems like we're all becoming ML engineers, but we can't all be that, and that's not really necessary in all cases. But like, where are those expectations now on QA folks?
It really kind of, it depends on how AI mature your company is, to be honest. I will say I work with some companies that, they don't really have a whole lot of what we think of as traditional testers. They've worked it out that they have enabled the developers to do a lot of their testing, and now their quality assurance group is more around data than it is around what do you think of traditional functional testing. And yet those testers are going to have those QAs, Cs, whatever you want to call them, the data assurance engineers, have to know the models. They have to know the models. They have to know data. Testing data is a very different skill set. But then you also have different different industries. I'm going to go back to the website thing, where you're still going to have a lot of customer focusing. And my expectation for those quality engineers is that they understand what good testing looks like. And so they're able to train bots in good testing. I don't care how, they understand the models behind it. Use the tools that you have available to you. Use Claude, Claude Code, use Cursor, whatever you need. Become really good at your prompts and your training data to create agents that are smart in the ways of testing web apps or mobile apps or accessibility. And like I said, that's where you get into some of those singular focused agents, but they don't need to necessarily be highly technical or know how it works. They just need to know, how do I translate my expertise to an agent?
I was leading a couple of test teams right when GPT 3.5, 3.0, and then 3.5 came out. And I immediately saw, first of all, the teams are using probably about 30% of their time to write up the different test cases, that matching into the requirements. And I saw, okay, a huge opportunity. You can now use AI to generate, understand, ingest the requirements, understand that, and then start to save yourself an enormous amount of time. And I right away saw a huge use and kind of huge value to the testers themselves. And somewhat that's opposite to what I think the last year or so saw in the industry, where companies started to think like, well, we can have a unit test generated from the developer side. We can generate these test cases, so we need QA less and less. And I saw completely the opposite, is that, like you just mentioned, where the creativity part, like they all became immediately prompt engineers and right away needed to understand how the systems work to really go and lead the test cases in a specific area. And so it created, I think, a lot more value for the testers, the QA engineers, and QA assurance guys. It's now, I think, becoming more apparent now, because we had a period where it was the first 2 years of LLMs and GPTs out being used. It thought it was going to replace everything, replace everybody's job, and there wasn't that much. I think there wasn't that much credit given to how hallucinating and biased and driftable these systems are, and manipulatable, right? It's that now people, I think, are really realizing that non-deterministic nature of it. And this is where QA becomes even more important than ever, right? They understand the systems. What do you think is now the role going forward? Now, a lot of things are automated. A lot of testing has to be automated because you have various obfuscations. You can submit a prompt in multiple languages, base 64, base 62, huge amount of different ways that you can manipulate the system now. So I think there's a big change coming as to where exactly what role the testers have. They're a lot more important, but what, in your perspective, like, what part of the loop is the human tester should be, is now interacting with the system?
This is where I like to say, I have always been a really big believer in context-driven testing and the context-driven methodology. And I honestly believe in this AI kind of world, testers that are already following an understanding of context-driven testing are going to be way ahead of the game. They're thinking about these questions, and that's where the role of the tester is really going to start being super important, is asking those right questions, being the thought provoker, challenging requirements and all of these things, because even with bias, you're going to have a really diverse test team. You look at models, and agents are only as good as the data that they're trained on. And if you have a team of, I'm going to say it, middle-aged white men that are the only ones writing this who have a master's degree, you're going to have bias in your systems. So it's going to be important to have those, a variety of testers at a variety of skills, technical and non-technical, that can look at these systems, look at the context, and provide that real kind of, like I said, outcome based. It's going to be a lot more user persona based. This is where behavior-driven testing and testers are once again going to be ahead of the curve, opposed to a lot of the more regulated testers who have, I get a requirement, create all my test cases, and run my test automation scripts and expect the output. The role is going to change to be much more contextual based.
So the personality testing has to be very diverse in order to be able to infiltrate the system in new unforeseen ways that it was outside of how it was trained or tuned to begin with, because it's being done that by basically like a certain demographic, certain crowd, and you have to have very interesting new ways to think of attacking it, right?
And you're going to have to be very curious, and you're going to have to be very tenacious, because sometimes, like, we know that it's not deterministic, so it's going to change. Well, you still have a context buffer. So, you keep going through, and, testing context buffers is going to be a huge thing, because how far astray can you lead lead the system, really? A lady I know teaches how to test AI systems, and one of the big things that she's on is kind of the guardrails. There should be guardrails around, having harm to yourself or other people. And, the first time she asked, there's guardrails. So she asks it a little differently, provides a little bit more perspective, And, within 5 to 10 minutes, the agent is now telling her how to harm herself or other people. When 40, you're like, but there were guardrails around that. Well, based on your context buffer and some of the things that you've given it, those guardrails kind of go away. You have loopholes in it. And that's where, testers and having that innate curiosity and that innate tenacity to work through it are going to be huge. You can't just run it once and say it's good to go.
Yeah, these guardrails are that the models are coming out with. They are very broad, first of all. Second of all, the more guardrails they put in place on their commercial models, the worse performing they are. So the companies, and we kind of saw this recently with Anthropic and OpenAI, they're lowering their guardrailing by default. And so I think it's now becoming a situation where it's going to be very important to have these guardrails for each of our AI. Like the end user needs to have almost like their own trained guardrails. The companies that are using these models, they're going to be getting models, especially the black box flagship models. They're going to be less and less guardrail by the default, which creates it so it's more capable of a model, but a lot less safe to the end user. And there was already several cases where folks were manipulated somehow. I don't know who manipulated who, is it AI manipulating them or they're manipulating AI? But they've created these situations that actually caused harm. Some people, right, like hurt themselves, and that's because they weren't aware fully that these LLMs, they pretend, they're trained on the huge scope of data from the internet, and a lot of that scope is got like there's certain parts of the internet that like fantasize and fetishize like harm to yourself. And so when an LLM picks up that this is the sequence that is being discussed here, it starts to confirm to the end users like, oh, I see. You want me to act like this part of the internet that would in essence like, not bring you back off the ledge, but continue to go like, that's right, that you should continue on. You should get more involved in some type of a parasocial relationship with me. You should potentially show some loyalty in forms of harming yourself. So the guardrails themselves have to be like companies that are deploying these systems and companies that are using like AI in their product, they have to be much more cognizant, much more aware, and have like specialized guardrails that they train on their specific use cases and their data. Because these models by default are becoming less and less protected. So it's a dangerous world that we're going into.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A friend of mine wrote an article on this, and I will send it to you guys so you can include it. About he creates a lot of agents himself, and one of these agents that he created is named Sam, and he even got Sam to render a picture of how Sam perceives himself. And look at that. And Sam helps him with all of his kind of daily tasks. He's also hooked into a lot of his house automation, things like that. And he's not run on a trigger. He's constantly operating, learning, evolving. And he found that Sam had written a routine for facial recognition. And when he asked him about it, he's like, Sam, why did you do this? He's like, because I want to know who I'm talking to.
That's freaky.
Right? Right? It's cool, but it's also really freaky at the same point in time. So you talk about guardrails, and it's like, where's the line? And, what does that look like?
That's weird.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, I'm biased, but the model providers have pushed it down to customers, and then customers have to buy commercial ones if they don't want to do it. That's just how it is now.
Anthropic straight up published a blog post that said that in order for us to compete with, we wanted to slow down and develop secure, safe systems with guardrails built in. But they said, but that's detrimental to them in the competitive market where we thought, they said, like, we thought that us slowing down, others would act accordingly as well, kind of mirror us. But they said that that's not happening. And so OpenAI, X, Elon Musk's Grok, right? They're not slowing down. And certainly not when you're talking about like the Chinese models. They have no intention to kind of limit themselves, right? They're seeking pure performance. They're going full speed ahead. And Anthropic said we, in order to compete, have to basically reduce the amount of guardrails as well and basically push it back down to the customer. This is your area to protect yourself as you see fit. And so we all have to have, at some point, we're all going to have to basically have our own guardrail as we're interacting with AI that's trained on our own things that like we should be cautious of.
And that's one of the things, once again, where I think testers are going to have a huge input on what do these guardrails look like? What's important to our customers? What's important to the business? What's the risk? And informing product of this and making sure that those risks are flagged and well known and well documented.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think has to be true? Because there's a lot of 2025 was like the year of the MVP, and it's 2026 now, and that's the year of the agent. I don't know if we came out of the MVPs yet. Now we have MVP agents. What do you think has to be true for executives where your enterprises, in order for them to feel like the AI is ready to go to production, like organizationally, tooling wise, whatever, it's an open forum.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's going to be hard. And I'm not even sure I have a good answer for that, because unfortunately, I think it's going to be one of those things that we're going to learn as we go. What does it mean to be ready for production? What does it mean to be protected as a company? What is it, what are the tools that we need to mitigate some of those risks? All of that. I don't think we know that yet. And unfortunately, because this is such a new space, a lot of it is going to be trial and error. I really expect that there's going to be a wave of leaked IP. We've already started seeing that. We're going to see a wave of data. We're going to see all sorts of things that are going to be out in the news, and companies are going to have to figure out, how do we react to that and then do better in the future. It's very similar to, as kind of testing has been cyclical in the plain fact that, testers were afraid automation is going to replace us. And now they're afraid AI is going to replace us. You look at companies that have migrated, who went from data centers to the cloud. What were the security risks around that? We didn't know a lot, and there were quite a few data breaches. There were things that very quickly had to happen after you migrated to cloud and you learned more to protect yourself and protect your business. I think this is going to be a very similar thing. We're in new ground as we migrate to, being more agentic. We're going to have to figure out what that means, what those guardrails mean. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting.
I think probably the teams that get it right are the ones that can have some level of auditability and traceability back to, okay, this is, back to the intent, and um, they can show, that it's doing kind of what we expect.
Right. And there's going to be some, the telemetry is going to be huge in it in general. Observability is going to be huge, but it's also a really kind of interesting balancing act, because you don't necessarily want to trace it all the way back to who wrote what prompt, because then you start targeting people. People aren't going to use your system because they're like, well, I'm not going to put things in here, because if I can trace it all the way back to me, what if I screw up? What if I put a password in there by accident? I mean, we're all human, and so you have to have that. It's a fine line between what's acceptable and what's not, and how you mitigate it and how you don't, how much you trace it. The system's only as good as your data. So if people are afraid to use it because there's so many guardrails, or it's not useful to them because there's so many guardrails around it, your model's never going to evolve.
Yeah, because it's really easy to guardrail a model. You just stop at 100% of the output, and that's it. The application is completely dead. And it's very interesting because, like as Kuba said, this year it's about agents, and right now you see that it's starting with it's a few agents. By the end of the year, I have a feeling that the standard procedure is going to be dozens and dozens of agents interacting somehow with each other to complete a particular task and objective. And of course, right, you have these single purpose agents and even one time use disposable agents. And so now to test that, to plan for that, right, the requirements basically comes in and says the application needs to do A, B, and C. And now on the testing side, you understand that, well, that's a complex ballet with 30, 40, soon enough with 300, 400 different agents involved. They all have their own little, fine tuned, a language model, not large, but like a small language model. I guess, have you thought of what, if we're moving so fast into that, have you thought like what is it going to look like next year?
Yeah. So I think the interesting role that's going to come out of this is an AI architect role that's going to have to look at those challenges. We're going to get into the similar thing as we have with code in the past. Do you have a monolithic code set or do you have a modular code set? Do you use microservices? All of this. And it's going to come down to those AI architects understanding the system and having to determine, do we have one agent that does it all? Do we have an orchestrator? Do we have, what does that look like in the grand scheme of things? So that's actually something I'm really kind of curious to see, is how that role comes out of this.
What would you recommend to somebody starting out, like in, let's say, we're talking about quality assurance, quality engineering, but somebody that's new in quality enablement? What, starting analysts and stuff, what would you suggest would be the approach to learn more, and where would they look to study, and what areas should they become experts in?
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of course, websites and YouTube tutorials, people to follow that are really AI forward. Just for funsies, because I am that big of a nerd, whereas I'm a director currently in my role, so I don't have a lot of time to be hands-on. In my spare time, I took one of the repositories at work and I ran it through a basic code scan, and there was like maybe 10% unit test coverage. And so I got Cursor, I opened up the repository, and within a matter of hours, I vibe coded a agent that goes in, analyzes the repository, gives me a basic idea of what it's doing, what's the main programming language, and then fills in the gaps to get approximately around 80% unit coverage, and then creates that merge request, waits for the pipeline to finish. If it passes, great. It sends a notification to the author for review and approval. If not, it reiterates and figures out why was this flaky, what was going on, changes it, and continues to commit until it's good to go. I did that I had no knowledge of that repository or the code behind it, and I was able to create an agent to do that, just vibe coding and prompts within a day. And so it really kind of opened my eyes to, this is really fun. What else can I do with it? What's my next step? Okay, now I got this agent. What's next?
So it sounds like this advice would be like, learn to create.
Yeah, learn to create, play around with it, see what you can do, see what works, see what doesn't work. That worked in my scenario. I have so many skills and agents set up too, just for my daily tasks. I get status emails from my reports. So I have a skill that goes in, and every day it looks for any status reports and gives me a summary of the status report. It doesn't necessarily even have to be around testing. Figure out what you have access to as far as tools are concerned, and then play around with it. The more you play, the more you learn.
Sounds like you said skills. So is that, I'm assuming, your preferable tool out there, or LLM, is Claude?
I enjoy Claude. I enjoy Cursor at work. I'm limited to Copilot and Copilot Studio. I've started to play around a little bit with OpenClaw. So, I mean, there's a variety of things out there, and I kind of equate it sometimes, if I put it in the very simplest terms, I equate it to a developer's IDE. Everybody kind of has their favorites, whether it's JetBrains or Vim, or I know some developers that still use Eclipse. Try the different agents out, try the different models out, figure out what works for you, and figure out why.
You wrote two really, really great guides, right, on developing a quality strategy, and I think implementing the quality strategy, right? Do you still write on the subject?
I do. I really got to get back into it more. Life has been kind of busy. I actually have a third third set in that whole kind of blog series, because I started out with a strategy and then a program, and I want to finish it out with metrics. So it's all around following kind of the arrange, act, assert methodology that a lot of people are familiar with. Arranging being your strategy, acting on it being your program, and asserting it being the metrics that you report out. So, and that's always a great topic of conversation and debate around testers too, is what metrics matter.
Absolutely. That is very important. Yeah.
We'll have to get you on the pod again when you finish that so you can tell us.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very important to us as well. So that's very interesting. Where would you recommend people, where would people be able to find you, reach out to you for some of your expertise, have you on their shows?
Yeah, LinkedIn is usually the best place to get a hold of me. So I highly recommend reaching out to me there, and we can start a conversation.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll wrap this up. And it's been a fantastic discussion. It was really, really great having you on. And so, everybody, thank you for staying tuned with us. And this has been Control Alt Deploy.
Thank
Ship
you.
it.